from my mom. She's sick, you racist!
The plane was at 30,000 feet when 10-year-old Maya Thompson stood up in the middle of the aisle and refused to sit down. Her small frame was trembling, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the flight attendant with a desperation that made every passenger within earshot fall silent. "My mama can't breathe," she cried out, her voice cracking with terror. "Please, somebody help my mama." The flight attendant, a woman named Karen Hendricks, stood over her with crossed arms and a face twisted in anger. "You need to sit down right now, young lady, or you will be arrested the moment we land," she hissed, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Maya didn't move. She couldn't move. Behind her, slumped in seat 23B, her mother Diane was gasping for air, her lips turning blue, her hand clutching her chest like she was trying to hold her heart inside her body. Other passengers had their phones out now, filming, whispering, some shouting for help. The chaos was building like a pressure cooker about to explode. But this moment, this breaking point, didn't start on that plane. It started 6 hours earlier in a small Atlanta apartment where a little girl was trying to be brave, and a mother was trying to hide just how sick she really was. The morning had started before the sun came up. In a modest 2-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta, Maya Thompson was already awake, moving quietly through the dim hallway so she wouldn't disturb her mother. At 10 years old, Maya had learned to be careful, to be helpful, to notice things that other kids her age never thought about. She noticed when the bills piled up on the kitchen counter. She noticed when her mother skipped meals but told her they'd already eaten. She noticed when her mother took those little white pills from the brown prescription bottle and tried to hide the way her hands shook. This morning, Maya was helping pack for a trip neither of them wanted to take but both knew they had to. Her grandmother, her mother's mother, had suffered a massive stroke 3 days ago in Seattle. The doctor said it was time to say goodbye. Maya had never been on a plane before. Her mother had been on one exactly twice in her entire life. They didn't have money for last-minute flights, but Diane Thompson had scraped together every dollar she had, borrowed some she didn't, and booked 2 seats on the cheapest airline she could find. Diane emerged from her bedroom moving slowly, each step deliberate like she was negotiating with her own body. She was 38 years old but looked older, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Maya watched her mama pause at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing, taking a deep breath before attempting to go down. "You okay, Mama?" Maya asked, her voice small and worried. "I'm fine, baby," Diane said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just didn't sleep good. You know how it is when you got a lot on your mind." But Maya did know. She'd heard her mother coughing through the night. She'd seen the tissues in the trash can, and she'd noticed how her mother kept one hand pressed to her chest like she was holding something in place. Maya wanted to ask more questions, but she'd learned over the years that sometimes asking made her mama more upset, made her feel like she wasn't doing a good job taking care of them. So Maya just nodded and went back to packing. In the bathroom, Diane stared at herself in the mirror and tried not to see what was staring back. The woman reflected there looked scared. She reached into the medicine cabinet and pulled out 3 different prescription bottles. Blood pressure medication. Heart medication. Pills her cardiologist had prescribed 6 months ago when he'd warned her, in that serious voice doctors use when they're really worried, that her heart wasn't functioning the way it should be. "You need to reduce stress, get more rest, eat better, and come in for regular monitoring," he'd said. Diane had nodded and agreed to all of it, knowing she couldn't afford to do any of it. Reduce stress when you're a single mother working 2 jobs? Get more rest when the bills don't stop coming? Eat better when you're choosing between groceries and utilities? Come in for regular monitoring when each appointment cost money she didn't have even with insurance? She'd done the best she could, which meant taking the pills, ignoring the symptoms, and praying she'd make it long enough to see Maya grow up. Now, staring at her reflection, Diane felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the shortness of breath that had been getting worse over the past few weeks. She dry swallowed 2 pills, gripped the sink until the moment passed and went to find her daughter. She found Maya in her bedroom, carefully folding clothes into a backpack that had seen better days. The bag was from a church donation drive 3 years ago, and Maya had covered the worn spots with patches and fabric markers, turning something old into something uniquely hers. Diane's heart squeezed, but not from her medical condition this time. How did she get so lucky to have a daughter this good, this strong, this beautiful? "Come here, baby," Diane said softly, sitting on the edge of Maya's bed. "Let me do your hair before we go." This was their ritual, had been since Maya was old enough to sit still. Diane sectioned Maya's thick, beautiful hair and began braiding, her fingers moving with practiced ease even as her breath came a little too fast, a little too shallow. Maya sat between her mother's knees, feeling safe in a way she only felt in these moments. "Mama," Maya said quietly, "is Grandma really gonna die?" Diane's hands paused for just a second before continuing. "Baby, Grandma's real sick. The doctors are doing everything they can, but sometimes people's bodies just get too tired. But that's why we're going. So we can see her, tell her we love her, hold her hand. That's important, you understand?" "I understand," Maya said, even though she didn't, not really. How could she understand death when she'd never really known it? Her father had left before she was born, so he was more like a ghost than a loss. Her world was her mother and her grandmother, and the thought of one of them disappearing felt impossible. "Your grandma is the strongest woman I ever knew," Diane continued, her voice thick with emotion as she worked through another braid. "She lived through things you can't even imagine. Grew up in Mississippi during Jim Crow, marched with Dr. King, raised 3 kids by herself when your granddaddy passed. She taught me everything about being strong, about standing up, about not letting people make you small." Maya absorbed this, storing it away. Her grandmother had always told her stories, but Diane didn't talk about the past much. Hearing it now felt important, like her mother was passing something down. "She used to tell me about Rosa Parks," Diane said, finishing one braid and starting another. "About how Mrs. Parks wasn't just tired that day she sat on that bus. She was tired of being treated less than. Tired of being invisible. Your grandma said that's what courage is sometimes, baby. Not being loud or making a scene, but just refusing to accept being treated wrong. Refusing to move when you know you shouldn't have to." "Like Mrs. Parks," Maya repeated, wanting to understand. "Like Mrs. Parks," Diane confirmed. "But your grandma also taught me something else. She said sometimes being polite, being quiet, keeping your head down, that's what keeps you safe. That's what keeps you alive. Especially when you look like us, baby. The world doesn't always like little black girls and black women who speak up. So you gotta be smart about it. You gotta be careful." These contradictions lived inside Maya now, planted by the women who loved her. Be strong but be quiet. Stand up but stay safe. Speak but don't make trouble. She didn't know how to do all of those things at once, but she trusted that her mother and grandmother knew best. Diane finished the last braid and tied it off. "All done, beautiful girl. Now let's finish packing and call that Uber. We got a plane to catch." They moved through the apartment gathering last-minute items. Diane counted out money for the Uber, for airport parking they couldn't afford but had no choice about, for food they'd need since they couldn't afford airport prices. Maya watched her mother's hands shake slightly as she counted 20s and 10s and 5s. "We're gonna be okay, Mama," Maya said, trying to sound sure. "I know, baby," Diane said, pulling her daughter close. "We're always okay as long as we got each other." The Uber arrived at 6:15 in the morning, a beat-up Honda driven by a tired-looking man who barely spoke. Diane struggled to lift their one shared suitcase into the trunk while Maya carried both their personal bags. The driver didn't offer to help. They climbed into the back seat, and as the car pulled away from the only home Maya had ever known, Diane had a coughing fit that lasted almost a full minute. "You all right, ma'am?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Fine," Diane managed to say between coughs. "Just allergies." Maya looked at her mother and said nothing, but her hand found Diane's and held tight. The sun was just starting to rise over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if either of them had been in the mood to notice. Instead, Diane stared out the window and tried to breathe normally, tried to ignore the pressure building in her chest, tried to calculate if the pills would hold her together long enough to see her mother one more time. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport took 35 minutes through early morning traffic. Maya watched the city roll past, the neighborhoods changing from rundown to renovated to commercial. She'd never been to the airport before, had only seen planes from a distance, silver birds too far up to seem real. Now they were going to be inside one, flying through the sky to Seattle. The thought was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. When they pulled up to the departure terminal, Diane paid the driver and tipped him $2 she couldn't afford because she'd been raised to be polite, to be grateful, to not make anyone feel bad even when she was the one struggling. They stood on the curb with their luggage and Diane took a moment to steady herself. The airport was massive, people everywhere, moving with purpose and speed that made her feel instantly overwhelmed. "Okay, baby," Diane said, trying to sound confident. "We check our bag, go through security, find our gate. Just like I explained. We got this." They made their way to the budget airline counter, a discount carrier Diane had chosen because it was $200 cheaper than the other options. The check-in area was crowded, lines snaking back and forth, families with crying babies and business travelers impatient with their phones. Diane and Maya found their place in line and waited. That's when Maya noticed him. An older black man, maybe 70, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, standing near the baggage check area. He was watching them, not in a creepy way, but with a kind expression that reminded Maya of someone who'd seen a lot of life and still found reasons to smile. When Diane struggled to lift their suitcase onto the scale, the man stepped forward. "Let me help you with that," he said, his voice warm and steady. Before Diane could protest, he'd lifted the bag easily and placed it on the belt. "Oh, thank you so much," Diane said, a little breathless. "That's very kind." "No trouble at all," the man said, then looked down at Maya. "First time flying?" Maya nodded, suddenly shy. "Well, you're in for a treat," he said, smiling. "I'm Mr. Patterson. I used to be a pilot, flew for 40 years. These big birds are safer than cars, nothing to be scared of." "Really?" Maya asked, her eyes wide. "Really," Mr. Patterson confirmed. "You just sit back, relax, and enjoy being up in the clouds. It's like magic, seeing the world from up there." Diane smiled gratefully. "We're heading to Seattle. Family emergency." Mr. Patterson's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry to hear that. But I'm sure your family will be glad to see you both. You take care now and have a smooth flight." He tipped an imaginary hat and walked away, leaving Diane and Maya feeling slightly better about the journey ahead. Small kindnesses from strangers, Diane thought, that's what gets us through sometimes. After checking their bag, they made their way to the security line. This was another world entirely. TSA agents barking instructions, people removing shoes and belts, laptops out of bags, liquids in clear plastic bags, the whole choreography of post-9/11 air travel that Diane had only vaguely understood from television. She tried to follow the rules, tried to move quickly, but her body wasn't cooperating. Halfway through removing her shoes, Diane had another coughing fit, worse than the one in the Uber. She bent over, trying to catch her breath, one hand on the plastic bin that held her purse and jacket. A TSA agent, a young woman with a no-nonsense expression, approached. "Ma'am, you all right? You need medical attention?" Diane shook her head vigorously, still coughing. "No, I'm fine. Just a cough. I'm fine." The agent looked skeptical but waved them through. Maya gathered their belongings while her mother composed herself, and they made it through the metal detector without further incident. On the other side, Diane sat on a bench and took more medication while Maya pretended not to notice how scared her mother looked. They found their gate an hour before boarding, gate C12, tucked in a corner of the massive terminal. The waiting area was filled with their fellow passengers, a cross-section of humanity about to share a metal tube hurtling through the sky. Diane and Maya found 2 seats near the window and settled in. That's when Maya started noticing the people around them, the strangers who would soon become part of the most important day of her life. There was a white man in an expensive suit, maybe in his 50s, completely absorbed in his phone. He typed constantly, barely looking up, his whole body language screaming important and busy and don't bother me. His shoes alone probably cost more than Diane's monthly rent. This was Dr. James Mitchell, cardiologist, though Maya didn't know that yet. She just knew he looked like he thought he was better than everyone around him. Dr. Mitchell was in the middle of responding to emails about a conference he didn't want to attend, thinking about the divorce papers his lawyer had sent him, calculating how many billable hours he was losing by flying commercial instead of taking calls. His daughter's birthday was in 3 days and he'd already missed 2 in a row. He'd ordered flowers to be delivered to his ex-wife's house with a card he'd had his assistant write. He told himself he'd make it up to her. He always told himself that. A few seats away sat an Asian American woman, maybe 30, reading a thick paperback book. She had kind eyes and a calm demeanor, occasionally looking up to people watch with a gentle curiosity. This was Sarah Chin, and she had the patient, observant quality of someone who spent their professional life caring about other people's problems. Her bag had a tag that said, Seattle Children's Hospital Volunteer. Sarah had spent the last 5 years as a social worker in Atlanta's most under-resourced neighborhoods, and she was transferring to Seattle to be closer to her aging parents. She'd seen enough neglect, enough children falling through cracks, enough families being failed by systems that were supposed to help them. She was tired but not broken, hopeful but not naive. She noticed Diane coughing and made a mental note to check on them if it got worse. Near the charging station stood a black man around 40, working on a laptop with focused intensity. He wore business casual clothes and had the confident air of someone successful but not showy about it. This was Marcus Johnson, and he traveled for work 50 weeks a year and hated every minute of it, But you do what you have to do when you're the only black partner at a consulting firm that loves to put your face on their diversity materials but never quite puts you in the room where real decisions get made. Marcus had learned to code switch so smoothly he sometimes forgot which version of himself was real. He'd been on 100 flights and witnessed a dozen medical emergencies, and he'd learned that the worst thing you could do was get involved, stick your neck out, make yourself memorable. Keep your head down, get home safe, that was the rule. And then there was the young white couple arguing quietly near the window, the kind of argument where they're trying not to make a scene but everyone can tell they're upset. The woman, blonde and thin, gestured emphatically while the man in khakis and a polo shirt kept checking his watch. These were Brad and Jennifer, and they were arguing about wedding centerpieces, which would seem absurd to them both before the flight was over. Jennifer wanted peonies. Brad thought they were too expensive and roses would be fine. Neither of them could hear how ridiculous they sounded because they were 26 and 27 and still thought the biggest problems in life were the ones that could be solved with the right vendor. Maya watched all these people and wondered about their lives, their stories, where they were going and why. She didn't know yet that they would all be witnesses to her mother's crisis. She didn't know yet that some of them would help and some would hesitate and some would change completely because of what was about to happen. Boarding was called at 7:45. Diane stood slowly, grimacing slightly, and Maya pretended not to see. They waited for their zone to be called, Zone 5, the last group, the cheap seats. As they moved down the jetway, Diane's breathing became more labored. The walk felt impossibly long, the slight incline of the ramp making her heart pound in a way that terrified her. "You okay, Mama?" Maya asked for what felt like the 100th time that morning. "I'm okay, baby," Diane lied for what felt like the 100th time. At the aircraft door, they were greeted by two flight attendants. The first was a young Latino man with a warm smile and kind eyes. His name tag read Tyler Rodriguez. "Welcome aboard," he said cheerfully. "Let me help you with those bags." But before he could move, the second flight attendant stepped forward and everything changed. Her name was Karen Hendricks, though her name tag just said K. Hendricks, Senior Flight Attendant. She was 45 years old with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, makeup precisely applied, uniform perfectly pressed. She looked at Diane and Maya with an expression that Maya couldn't quite name but instinctively didn't like. "Do you need extra assistance?" Karen asked, her tone suggesting that needing help would be an inconvenience. "No, thank you, we're fine," Diane said quietly, trying to move past. Karen's eyes traveled from Diane's worn jacket to Maya's patched backpack to their economy boarding passes. "You're in seats 23B and C. That's in the back," she said, as if they might not understand the alphabet or numbers. "It's quite a walk. Are you sure you can manage?" There was something in the way she said it, something in the way she looked at them that made Diane's jaw tighten. But she'd spent 38 years learning to swallow her pride, to keep her head down, to not make waves. "We can manage," she said evenly. Tyler stepped in, still smiling. "Let me at least take one of those bags for you," he said to Maya, reaching for her mother's carry-on. Maya handed it over gratefully. Karen's expression soured slightly as she watched Tyler help them. "Tyler, we have other passengers boarding," she said curtly. "Just helping them get settled, Karen," Tyler said mildly, but his smile had dimmed a little. As they made their way down the narrow aisle, Diane heard Karen say to someone behind them, "Maybe people should consider their health before booking flights." It was said just loud enough to hear, quiet enough to deny if confronted. Maya felt her mother's hand tighten on her shoulder. They reached their seats, middle, row 23. Diane let Maya have the window seat because at least that was one small thing she could give her daughter on this awful trip. Maya pressed her face to the glass, watching luggage being loaded below, while Diane struggled to catch her breath from the walk down the aisle. The plane filled up around them. Dr. Mitchell took his first-class seat and immediately put in his AirPods, closing his eyes. Sarah Chin settled into her economy seat 3 rows ahead of Diane and Maya, pulling out her book. Marcus found his aisle seat in the exit row and went back to his laptop. Brad and Jennifer sat across from each other in the last row, still not speaking, both staring at their phones. Tyler came by to check on everyone, offering pillows and blankets. When he got to Diane and Maya, he crouched down to their level. "You ladies all set? Need anything before we take off?" "We're good, thank you," Diane said and meant it. His kindness felt like water in a desert. Karen made the safety announcement with practiced efficiency, going through the motions she'd performed thousands of times over 20 years. She'd started this job young and optimistic, thinking she'd see the world, meet interesting people, have adventures. Instead, she'd gotten 2 decades of cramped crew quarters, impossible passengers, corporate cost-cutting, and a job that paid less every year while demanding more. Her ex-husband had left her for a younger woman, a flight attendant he'd met on a layover, which was almost funny except it wasn't. Her mother was in a nursing home that cost more than Karen made in a month. Her daughter barely spoke to her anymore, said Karen was never around, never cared, always chose work over family. Karen was tired and angry and so deeply resentful of her life that she'd stopped noticing when that resentment leaked out onto passengers who didn't deserve it. She looked at Diane and Maya in their cheap seats with their worn clothes and saw people who probably got government assistance, probably didn't appreciate the opportunity to fly, probably would complain about something. She didn't see a mother racing to say goodbye to her dying parent. She didn't see a little girl scared and trying to be brave. She saw what she'd trained herself to see, problems waiting to happen. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines roared to life. Maya grabbed her mother's hand as they taxied toward the runway, and Diane held on like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The acceleration of takeoff pressed them back into their seats, and then they were airborne, Atlanta falling away beneath them, the world becoming a patchwork of streets and buildings and green spaces that looked like toys from up here. Maya's eyes were wide with wonder despite her worry. "Mama, look. We're flying. We're really flying." Diane managed to smile, but she was focused on her breathing, on the tightness in her chest that was getting worse instead of better. She told herself it was just anxiety about the flight, about her mother dying, about everything happening all at once. She told herself she just needed to relax, to breathe slow and deep, to make it through these few hours and then she could rest. She was wrong. The first hour of the flight passed in a blur of discomfort Diane tried desperately to hide. The seatbelt sign turned off, and the flight attendants began their service. Karen worked the back of the plane with mechanical efficiency, taking drink orders without making eye contact, delivering tiny bags of pretzels like she was doing everyone a favor. When she got to row 23 she barely looked at them. "Drinks? Could I have some water please?" Diane asked. "And maybe some extra napkins?" Karen's eyes flicked to her, annoyed. "Water. Extra napkins. Anything else?" "No thank you," Diane said quietly. Karen moved on without acknowledging her, and it took another 15 minutes before the water arrived, delivered by Tyler who noticed Karen had somehow skipped their row. He brought extra napkins without being asked again and a ginger ale for Maya. "Thought you might like something sweet," he said with a wink. "Thank you," Maya said and meant it with her whole heart. Tyler noticed Diane looked pale, sweaty. "Ma'am, you feeling okay? You need anything?" "I'm all right," Diane said because that's what she always said. "Just not used to flying." "Well, you're doing great," Tyler said. "Call if you need anything at all, okay?" After he left, Diane sipped her water and tried to convince herself she was fine. The pressure in her chest was constant now, a weight that made every breath feel incomplete. Her left arm ached. She knew these signs, had been warned about them, but acknowledging them would mean admitting she'd made a terrible mistake getting on this plane. It would mean scaring Maya. It would mean not making it to Seattle, not seeing her mother one last time. So she breathed through it, squeezed her eyes shut and prayed. Maya sensed something was wrong but didn't know what to do about it. She tried to distract herself by looking out the window, watching clouds drift past like cotton pulled apart. She tried to distract her mother by talking about what she saw, making up stories about what was below them, but Diane's responses got shorter, her breathing shallower. Sarah Chin, 3 rows ahead, turned in her seat to stretch and caught sight of Diane's face. Even from that distance she could tell something wasn't right. The woman looked gray clammy. Sarah was about to get up and check when the plane hit turbulence. It wasn't terrible turbulence, just the normal bumps that happen when you're flying through air currents at 500 miles an hour. But for Diane, whose heart was already struggling, whose blood pressure was spiking, whose body was screaming that something was very wrong, the sudden movement was too much. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath that turned into a cry she couldn't quite suppress. Her hand flew to her chest, gripping her shirt like she could physically hold her heart together. Maya's head whipped around. "Mama?" "I'm okay," Diane managed, but she wasn't. The pain was radiating down her arm now, up into her jaw. She recognized what this was. She'd been a nurse's aide for 5 years before budget cuts eliminated her position. She knew the signs of a heart attack. This was happening. This was really happening. "Mama, you're not okay," Maya said, her voice rising with panic. "You're not okay." Diane tried to calm her, tried to smile, but another wave of pain hit and she doubled over as much as the seatbelt would allow. Maya pressed the call button. She pressed it once, twice, 3 times, her small finger jabbing at it with increasing desperation. It took almost 2 full minutes for anyone to respond. When the call light finally brought someone, it was Karen. She appeared at their row looking irritated, like she'd been interrupted from something important. "What is it?" she asked, not even looking at Diane. "My mama doesn't feel good," Maya said, her voice shaking. "Something's wrong." Karen finally looked at Diane, saw her bent over, breathing hard, but didn't see urgency. She saw drama. She saw someone probably having a panic attack, someone who was going to make her job harder. "It's just turbulence," Karen said dismissively. "Happens all the time. She'll be fine." "But Maya started. "She's fine," Karen cut her off. "It's scary the first time you fly, I know. But the turbulence is over now. Just try to relax." Diane tried to speak, to explain, but the pain was so intense she couldn't form words. She managed to look up at Karen, and in that look was a plea so raw, so desperate, that anyone with an ounce of empathy would have seen it. Karen saw a black woman in cheap seats making a fuss. "Ma'am, you're going to be fine," she said, her tone suggesting Diane was being dramatic. "Just breathe slowly. Would you like a paper bag? She needs help." Maya insisted, tears starting to form. "Sweetie," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension, "your mother is having a panic attack. Feels scary but it's not dangerous. She just needs to calm down. Can you help her calm down?" Sarah Chin heard this exchange from 3 rows up and unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood and moved toward them, but Karen held up a hand. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to return to your seat." "That woman needs help," Sarah said firmly. "That woman is having anxiety," Karen replied. "I'm trained in first aid. I can handle this. Please sit down." Sarah hesitated, torn between compliance and her instinct that something was very wrong. Karen's authority won and she sat back down, but she kept watching. Karen turned back to Diane. "Ma'am, have you taken any medication? Sometimes medications can make you feel anxious or dizzy." Diane, through gritted teeth, managed to say, "Heart medication." Karen's expression didn't change. "Well, there you go. Medication side effects. Probably mixing with the altitude. Just rest and you'll feel better soon." She walked away. Maya sat there, stunned, not understanding how the woman could just leave. "Mama, what do I do?" Diane couldn't answer. The pain was white-hot now, consuming her entire chest, radiating everywhere. She was sweating profusely, and her breathing was coming in short, inadequate gasps. She tried to reach for Maya's hand but couldn't quite make her arm obey. Maya started to cry. Not the quiet, polite crying she'd been taught was acceptable, but the scared, desperate crying of a child who knows something is terribly wrong and no one is listening. Other passengers started to notice. The man across the aisle looked over, concerned. A woman 2 rows back craned her neck to see what was happening. Minutes passed. 5, then 10, then 15. Diane's condition deteriorated with each one. Her lips started to take on a bluish tint. Her skin went from gray to ashen. Her eyes started to lose focus. Maya pressed the call button again. And again. And again. This time Tyler responded. He took one look at Diane and his training kicked in immediately. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Ma'am?" Diane's eyes focused on him with effort. "Can't breathe, chest." Tyler's face went pale. "I need to get the first aid kit. Just hold on, okay?" He looked at Maya. "You did the right thing calling. Hold your mom's hand. I'll be right back." He rushed toward the front of the plane, nearly running. Karen saw him moving fast and intercepted him. "Tyler, what's wrong?" "That woman in 23. She's in serious distress. I need the medical kit and we need to ask if there's a doctor on board." Karen's expression hardened. "I already checked on her. She's fine. She's just anxious." "Karen, she's not fine," Tyler said, his voice urgent. "She can barely breathe. Her lips are turning blue. This is serious." "Tyler," Karen said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "we are already 40 minutes behind schedule because of the late departure. Do you know what a diversion costs? Do you know the paperwork involved? I assessed the situation. She's having a panic attack. If we call for a doctor, we make an announcement, we create a situation. She just needs time to calm down." Tyler stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "If she's having a cardiac event and we don't act, she could die." "She's not having a cardiac event," Karen snapped. "She's nervous. You're overreacting." But Tyler had already made his decision. He pushed past her, grabbed the medical kit, and made his way back to row 23. Behind him, he heard the PA system crackle to life. Karen's voice, tight with barely controlled anger, came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Thank you for your cooperation." It was a lie and Tyler knew it, She was trying to keep people in their seats, trying to prevent anyone from helping, trying to maintain control of a situation she'd already lost. Tyler reached Diane and opened the medical kit, pulling out the blood pressure cuff and pulse oximeter. Other passengers were watching now, phones coming out, some people standing despite Karen's announcement. The elderly couple across the aisle leaned in. The businessman 2 rows up closed his laptop. Tyler wrapped the blood pressure cuff around Diane's arm, and what he saw made his stomach drop. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. Her pulse was rapid and irregular. Her oxygen saturation was dropping. This wasn't anxiety. This was a medical emergency. Marcus Johnson stood up from his exit row seat and made his way back. "Is there anything I can do?" Before Tyler could answer, Karen appeared, her face flushed with anger. "Everyone needs to return to their seats immediately. This is a safety issue." "This woman is having a medical emergency," Tyler said loudly enough for people to hear. "I need to know if there's a doctor on board." "There is no emergency," Karen said through gritted teeth. "Tyler, I'm ordering you to. Is there a doctor on this plane?" Tyler shouted, ignoring her completely. In first class, Dr. James Mitchell heard the commotion. He'd been deep in his own world, listening to a podcast about new surgical techniques, trying to forget about the daughter whose birthday he'd miss and the patients he'd been too busy to really see. The shout penetrated his bubble of self-absorption. He pulled out his AirPods and listened. Tyler called out again. "We need medical assistance. Is there a doctor on board?" Dr. Mitchell's first instinct was to stay seated. Getting involved meant responsibility. It meant potential liability. It meant complicating his day, missing his connection in Seattle, possibly having to give statements or fill out paperwork. He had enough problems. Some people thrived on being heroes. He wasn't one of them. But Sarah Chin was already standing, pushing past people to get to the back of the plane. Marcus was asking Tyler what he needed. Other passengers were calling out offers of help. And Dr. Mitchell, for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt something that cut through his carefully constructed wall of professional detachment. He felt ashamed. He stood up, straightened his expensive suit jacket, and made his way to the back of the plane. The crowd parted for him instinctively, recognizing authority in the way he moved. When he reached row 23, he saw Diane slumped in her seat, barely conscious, a terrified little girl holding her hand, and Tyler trying desperately to help with the limited tools he had. "I'm a doctor," Dr. Mitchell said. "Cardiologist. Let me through." Karen stepped in front of him. "Sir, we have this under control. This passenger is experiencing anxiety and—" "Get out of my way," Dr. Mitchell said, his voice cold and commanding in a way that made Karen step back instinctively. He crouched down next to Diane and immediately began his assessment. He checked her pulse, her breathing, her responsiveness. He looked at the blood pressure reading Tyler had taken. His expression went from concern to alarmed. "This woman is having a cardiac event," he said loudly, clearly, so everyone could hear. "She's in acute distress. She needs emergency medical intervention immediately." "We're 2 hours from landing," Karen said, her voice rising. "She'll have to wait. We can't just—" Dr. Mitchell stood up and looked at her with the full weight of his authority. "In 2 hours this woman will be dead. She's having a heart attack. Her heart is failing. She needs a hospital now. We need to divert this plane immediately." The cabin went silent except for the sound of the engines and Diane's labored breathing. Passengers stared. Some had their phones out, recording everything. Karen's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, anger, and then something that looked almost like fear. I can't authorize a diversion," she stammered. "That's not my call. The captain has to." "Then get the captain on the phone right now," Dr. Mitchell commanded. Tyler already had the phone in his hand. He was calling the cockpit when Karen tried to grab it from him. "Tyler, don't you dare." But Tyler had already made the connection. "Captain, this is Rodriguez. We have a medical emergency in the cabin. A passenger is having what appears to be a heart attack. There's a cardiologist on board who's assessed her. He says we need to divert immediately." There was a pause, then the captain's voice came through, calm and professional. "Put the doctor on." Dr. Mitchell took the phone. "Captain, this is Dr. James Mitchell. I'm a cardiologist. I have a patient here presenting with all the classic signs of acute myocardial infarction. Severe chest pain radiating to the arm and jaw, diaphoresis, dyspnea, cyanosis, elevated blood pressure, irregular pulse. She's critical and deteriorating. She needs emergency intervention that I cannot provide at altitude. We need to land. Now." The captain's response was immediate. "Understood, doctor." I'm checking for the nearest suitable airport. Give me 1 minute. Karen stood frozen, watching her control of the situation completely dissolve. Other flight attendants had gathered, unsure what to do. Passengers were standing now, trying to help, asking what they could do. The orderly, predictable flight she'd been managing had turned into chaos, and somewhere deep down, Karen knew it was her fault. The PA system crackled. The captain's voice, steady and reassuring, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been informed of a medical emergency on board. We're diverting to Nashville International Airport. Our estimated arrival is 23 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare for an emergency landing. Medical personnel, please stand by to assist. The cabin erupted in a mixture of relief and concern. Some passengers clapped. Others called out encouragement to Diane. Maya, who had been crying silently, looked up at Dr. Mitchell with eyes full of desperate hope. Is my mama going to die? Dr. Mitchell looked at this little girl, really looked at her, maybe the first time he'd really looked at anyone in months. She reminded him of his own daughter, the one he barely knew anymore because he was always working, always busy, always somewhere else. He thought about what his daughter would feel if it was her mother dying and no one helped. He thought about all the patients he'd treated with clinical detachment, never seeing the families behind them, the children who needed them, the whole human stories he'd reduced to charts and procedures. I'm going to do everything I can to save her, he said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. But I need you to be brave for just a little longer. Can you do that? Maya nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Dr. Mitchell turned back to Diane, who was fading in and out of consciousness. He had Tyler bring oxygen and they got a mask on her face. He elevated her feet, trying to improve blood flow to her heart and brain. He talked to her, keeping her engaged, fighting to keep her conscious. Diane, stay with me. Stay with Maya. Your daughter needs you. Your mother needs you. Just 20 more minutes. Just hold on. Sarah Chin pushed through the crowd. I'm a social worker. What can I do? Stay with the girl, Dr. Mitchell said without looking up. Keep her calm. Talk to her. Don't let her see how scared I am. Sarah crouched down next to Maya and put an arm around her shoulders. Your mama's going to be okay, she said, hoping it was true. That doctor is one of the best. And you were so brave calling for help. You saved your mama's life. You know that, right? Maya looked at her with those big, scared eyes. I didn't know what else to do. The lady said Mama was fine, but I knew she wasn't. Grandma always told me to trust what I know. Your grandma sounds like a smart woman, Sarah said. She's dying, Maya whispered. In Seattle. We were going to see her. That's why we're on this plane. Sarah's heart broke a little. This child was carrying so much. Well, first we get your mama to a hospital and make sure she's okay. Then we'll figure out the rest. One thing at a time. The plane was descending now, the captain pushing the aircraft to its limits to get on the ground as fast as safely possible. In the cockpit, he'd already radioed ahead. Emergency medical services were waiting on the tarmac. The nearest hospital had been alerted to expect a cardiac patient. Everything that could be done was being done. But in row 23, Karen Hendricks stood apart from the activity, watching it all unfold like a spectator at a disaster she'd caused. Tyler wasn't looking at her. Dr. Mitchell had dismissed her completely. Passengers who'd witnessed her refusal to help were whispering, pointing, recording. She could see her career ending in real time, could imagine the investigation, the termination, the humiliation. But worse than any of that was the knowledge that she'd almost let a woman die because of her own bitterness and bias. She'd looked at Diane Thompson and seen someone not worth her time, not worth believing, not worth helping. And that choice, that decision made in a split second based on prejudices she'd told herself she didn't have, had almost killed someone. Karen wanted to disappear. She wanted to turn back time. She wanted to be anywhere but here, facing the consequences of who she'd become. But there was nowhere to hide at 30,000 feet. The descent was rapid, the plane angling down at a steeper grade than normal. Passengers gripped their armrests and used to this kind of approach. In the back, Dr. Mitchell never left Diane's side. He monitored her pulse, adjusted her oxygen, talked to her constantly. Almost there, Diane. Almost there. Stay with me. Stay with your daughter. Maya held her mother's other hand, whispering her own prayers, making promises she'd later remember. Mama, please don't leave me. Please. I'll be so good. I'll never complain. I'll help with everything. Just please wake up. Please be okay. When the wheels touched down in Nashville, the landing was harder than usual, the plane braking aggressively to reduce taxi time. The moment they stopped, before the seatbelt sign even turned off, the cabin door opened and paramedics rushed in. They had a stretcher, equipment, everything needed to stabilize a cardiac patient. Dr. Mitchell briefed them quickly, efficiently, using medical terminology that Maya didn't understand but that made the paramedics nod seriously and move with even more urgency. They transferred Diane to the stretcher, maintaining the oxygen, starting in 4-line, hooking up a portable monitor that beeped with her irregular heartbeat. Maya tried to follow but a paramedic gently stopped her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but we need room to work. You'll have to." "I'm going with my mama," Maya said, her voice small but absolutely certain. "I'm not leaving her." The paramedic looked at this tiny, fierce child and saw something he recognized. He'd been a paramedic for 15 years, had seen every kind of family in crisis, and he knew when to bend the rules. "Okay, little one. You can come. But you have to stay out of the way and do exactly what we say. Deal?" "Deal," Maya said. They rushed down the aisle, past all the passengers who'd watched the drama unfold, past Karen who couldn't meet anyone's eyes, past Tyler who gave Maya a thumbs up and mouthed "You did good," past Dr. Mitchell who was gathering his belongings to follow them to the hospital. Outside, an ambulance waited with lights flashing. They loaded Diane in, Maya climbing in behind her, and the doors slammed shut. The siren wailed to life and they were moving, speeding toward Vanderbilt University Medical Center where a cardiac team was already scrubbing in, preparing to save a life that had almost been lost because someone didn't think it was worth saving. On the plane, passengers slowly gathered their things in stunned silence. The captain made an announcement thanking everyone for their patience and cooperation, explaining that they'd refuel and continue to Seattle within the hour. Most passengers seemed okay with the delay. Some were shaken. Many were angry about what they'd witnessed. A woman in row 18 approached Karen directly. "I recorded everything," she said, holding up her phone. "Every single thing you said and did. Or didn't do. I'm sending it to the airline. And the news. What you did was unconscionable." Karen opened her mouth to defend herself, but what could she say? The woman was right. She'd been unconscionable. Tyler stood with the other flight attendants, being briefed by the captain about the continuation of the flight. The captain pulled him aside. "You did the right thing, Rodriguez. You followed protocol and you probably saved that woman's life. I'll be noting that in my report." "Thank you, sir," Tyler said. "But I should have pushed harder sooner. I knew something was wrong." "We all knew something was wrong," Sarah Chin said, having overheard. She was waiting to reboard, having grabbed her bags. "But only you and that doctor actually did something. The rest of us." She trailed off, shaking her head. Marcus Johnson was there too, looking uncomfortable. "I've been on 100 flights," he said to no one in particular. "I've seen problems. I always mind my business. Always. Because getting involved as a black man can mean anything from inconvenience to danger. But watching that little girl beg for help for her mama, and nobody listening." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. Dr. Mitchell had already called his office, canceled his afternoon appointments, and arranged for his luggage to be sent ahead. He wasn't getting back on that plane. He was going to the hospital to make sure Diane Thompson got the care she needed, to make sure someone advocated for her, to make sure Maya wasn't alone. It was the least he could do. It was the most he'd done for anyone in years. At Vanderbilt Medical Center, the emergency room was controlled chaos. Diane was rushed into a trauma bay where the cardiac team was waiting. Maya was guided to a waiting area by a nurse who promised to update her every few minutes. She sat in a plastic chair, her legs not quite reaching the floor, her hands folded in her lap, trying to be brave like her mama always told her to be. But she wasn't brave. She was terrified. A few minutes later, Sarah Chen walked into the waiting room. She'd grabbed the first Uber she could find, unable to just leave a scared child alone in a strange city. She sat down next to Maya and put an arm around her. "You shouldn't be alone right now," Sarah said simply. Maya leaned into her, this kind stranger, and finally let herself fall apart. She sobbed like she'd been holding it in for hours, which she had. Sarah held her and let her cry, didn't try to fix it or minimize it, just held her and let her feel what she was feeling. When Dr. Mitchell arrived 20 minutes later, he found them like that. He'd pulled strings, called colleagues, made sure that the best cardiac surgeon in Nashville was being consulted, that Diane was getting every advantage his name and reputation could provide. He sat down on Maya's other side. "Your mama's in surgery," he said gently. "Her heart was damaged, but they're fixing it. The surgeon is excellent. The best in the state. She's in the best hands possible." "Is she gonna die?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Mitchell wanted to lie, to reassure, to promise everything would be fine. But he thought about his own daughter and how he'd want someone to tell her the truth. "I don't know," he said honestly. "She's very sick. The next few hours will tell us a lot. But I promise you, everyone here is fighting for her. And your mama, she's a fighter. I can tell. Anyone who raised a daughter as brave as you, that's a fighter." Maya absorbed this, appreciated the honesty even though it scared her. "Thank you for helping her. That other lady wouldn't help. She said Mama was fine. But she wasn't fine." "No," Dr. Mitchell said, his jaw tightening. "She wasn't fine. And that flight attendant made a terrible mistake. A mistake that could have cost your mother her life. But you didn't let that happen. You kept pushing. You kept asking for help. You saved her, Maya. You saved your mama." Sarah Chin pulled out her phone. "Maya, is there someone we should call? Your grandmother in Seattle?" Maya's eyes widened. "Grandma. She doesn't know. And she's sick too. If something happens to Mama?" "Give me the number," Sarah said. "I'll call. I'll explain what happened. Your grandma needs to know, but we'll make sure she knows your mama's being taken care of." The call was difficult. Maya's grandmother, 73 years old and recovering from her own stroke, heard that her daughter was in emergency heart surgery and nearly fell apart. But she also heard about her granddaughter's courage, about the doctor who'd stepped up, about the strangers who were making sure Maya wasn't alone. Through tears, she told Sarah to tell Maya she was proud, so proud, and that they were both fighters, all 3 generations of Thompson women. Hours passed in that waiting room. Dr. Mitchell made phone calls, consulted with the surgical team, paced. Sarah stayed close to Maya, ordering food from the cafeteria that Maya barely touched, finding a hospital social worker to help with immediate logistics. Tyler Rodriguez showed up after his flight finally continued without him, bringing Maya's backpack that she'd left on the plane, sitting with her in supportive silence. Other passengers from the flight started reaching out to the hospital, to the airline, to news stations. The video footage began circulating online. Karen Hendricks refusing to help. Karen Hendricks dismissing a dying woman's symptoms. Karen Hendricks threatening to have a terrified child arrested. The hashtag started trending. Justice for Diane. Justice for Maya. Believe Black women. The story went viral while Diane fought for her life in an operating room. The surgeon emerged after 4 hours, still in his scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. Maya jumped to her feet. Dr. Mitchell stood beside her. "The surgery went well," the surgeon said. "Your mother had a complete blockage in her left anterior descending artery. We performed an emergency angioplasty and placed 2 stents. Her heart sustained some damage, but we were able to minimize it because she got here when she did. Another hour and..." He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. "She's critical but stable. The next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial, but I'm cautiously optimistic." Maya didn't understand all the medical terms, but she understood one thing. Her mama was alive. She burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of relief so powerful they shook her whole body. "Can I see her?" Maya asked when she could speak. "She's in the ICU and heavily sedated," the surgeon said. "But yes, you can see her. Just for a few minutes." They led Maya to the ICU, and she barely recognized the woman in the bed. Her mama was surrounded by machines, tubes everywhere, monitors beeping a rhythm that meant life. But she was breathing. Her chest was rising and falling. She was alive. Maya walked to the bedside and carefully took her mother's hand. "Mama, it's me. It's Maya. You're gonna be okay. The doctor said so. You just gotta rest now. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I love you, Mama. I love you so much." Diane, deep in her medically induced sleep, didn't respond. But her fingers just barely squeezed Maya's hand. Sarah Chin stood in the doorway watching this scene, tears running down her face. She'd seen a lot of trauma in her work, a lot of families in crisis, but something about this hit different. Maybe it was Maya's courage. Maybe it was seeing how close they'd come to a different ending. Maybe it was bearing witness to what happened when people didn't listen, when biases led to dismissal, when a child had to fight for her mother's life because the adults around them failed. She pulled out her phone and started making notes. This story needed to be told properly, completely. Not just the viral video clips but the whole context. The systemic failures. The individual choices. The happy ending that almost wasn't. Outside the ICU, Dr. Mitchell was on the phone with his daughter. For the first time in months, maybe years, he was really talking to her. Really listening. "I know I've missed a lot," he was saying. "I know I've made work more important than you. But I'm trying to do better. I want to do better. Can we try again?" His daughter's voice on the other end was cautious, hurt still fresh, but there was hope there too. "Okay, Dad. We can try." Tyler Rodriguez was dealing with his own reckoning. He'd received a call from the airline's regional manager, summoning him for a meeting as soon as he returned to Atlanta. He didn't know if he was in trouble or being commended. He didn't particularly care. He'd done the right thing and he'd do it again. If that cost him his job, so be it. But the real reckoning was happening in a small conference room at Nashville International Airport, where Karen Hendricks sat across from two corporate investigators and a lawyer. They had the videos. They had passenger statements. They had Tyler's written account. They had the captain's report. They had everything they needed. Karen tried to explain. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen hundreds of panic attacks. She seemed fine when she boarded. I didn't think." "That's the problem, Ms. Hendricks," one of the investigators said. "You didn't think. Or rather, you thought you knew better than multiple people telling you there was an emergency. You thought you knew better than your fellow flight attendant. You thought you knew better than a cardiologist. And your decision nearly killed a passenger." "I was following my training," Karen insisted weakly. The lawyer slid a folder across the table. "This is your personnel file. 12 complaints in the last 5 years. 7 involving passengers of color. Multiple instances of judgment calls that turned out to be wrong. 2 previous medical situations where you delayed appropriate response. We should have acted sooner. We didn't. That's on us. But this." She tapped the folder. "This is on you." Karen knew what was coming. She'd known since the moment that plane landed. "You're firing me." "We're terminating your employment effective immediately," the lawyer confirmed. "You're fortunate we're not pursuing legal action, but that may still be an option depending on Mrs. Thompson's recovery and her family's wishes." Karen wanted to argue, to defend herself, to explain all the reasons she'd become so bitter and hard. But looking at these people, at the evidence of her failures spread across the table, she realized something. She'd become the thing she'd always feared she'd never be: irrelevant, unnecessary, and wrong. And this time her being wrong had almost killed someone. "I don't expect you to understand," Karen said quietly. "But I'm not a monster. I'm not racist. I stopped seeing people. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing passengers as people and started seeing them as problems or non-problems. And I was wrong. I was so wrong." "Yes," the investigator said. "You were." They escorted her out through a side entrance to avoid the media that had started gathering. Karen Hendricks walked out into the Nashville afternoon sun, unemployed, humiliated, and facing the wreckage of a career and a reputation destroyed in a few hours of terrible judgment. Back at the hospital, days began to blur together. Diane remained in the ICU, slowly improving. Maya barely left her side except when forced to by nurses who insisted she needed rest, food, sleep. Sarah Chin stayed in Nashville, taking emergency leave from her new job, becoming Maya's temporary guardian, advocate, and friend. Dr. Mitchell extended his stay, consulting on Diane's care, making sure she received top-tier treatment, becoming emotionally invested in a patient's recovery for the first time in his career. The media attention intensified. News outlets wanted interviews. Social media demanded justice. The airline issued statement after statement, each more apologetic than the last. They fired Karen. They suspended 2 supervisors who'd missed the pattern of complaints. They announced comprehensive bias training for all staff. They established new medical emergency protocols. They created a scholarship fund in Maya's name. But Maya didn't care about any of that. She cared about her mama opening her eyes, recognizing her, squeezing her hand with real strength. She cared about the doctor saying her mama would survive, would recover, would eventually be okay. 1 week after the emergency landing, Diane was conscious, weak but aware. Maya sat beside her bed, holding her hand, telling her everything that had happened. Diane cried hearing about her daughter's courage, about the strangers who'd helped, about how close they'd come to never seeing each other again. "Baby," Diane whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd only recently removed. "You saved my life." "I just did what you and Grandma taught me," Maya said. "I didn't let them make me small. I didn't let them make you invisible." Diane touched her daughter's face. "I'm sorry I ever made you think being quiet was more important than being heard. I'm sorry I taught you to make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable. Your grandma was right. Sometimes you gotta stand up. Sometimes you gotta take up space. Sometimes you gotta refuse to move." From the doorway, Sarah Chin listened and quietly cried. This was healing happening in real time. This was generational trauma being acknowledged and released. This was a mother and daughter finding a new way forward. Dr. Mitchell stopped by every day, even though Diane was no longer technically his patient. He talked to Maya about school, about her dreams, about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Maya said maybe a doctor, maybe a pilot, maybe both. Dr. Mitchell said she could do anything she set her mind to, and he meant it. This child had taught him more about courage and advocacy than medical school ever had. 2 weeks after the emergency, Diane was moved out of the ICU to a regular room. 3 weeks after, she was cleared to fly to Seattle, accompanied by a medical team the airline provided free of charge. Sarah Chin arranged everything, liaising with Diane's family, coordinating with the airline, making sure Maya and Diane had everything they needed. The flight to Seattle was on a different airline, first class, with a crew briefed on their story and determined to make the trip perfect. The captain came back to meet them personally. The flight attendants treated them like royalty. Other passengers who recognized them from the news applauded when they boarded. Maya sat by the window again, but this time her mama was healthy enough to point out the sights with her, to share the wonder of flying instead of fighting to survive it. When they landed in Seattle, Diane's family was waiting. Her mother, Maya's grandmother, in a wheelchair but alive, arms outstretched, crying with joy at seeing her daughter and granddaughter. 3 generations of Thompson women held each other in that airport terminal while strangers took photos and wiped their own tears. They'd all survived. They'd all fought. They'd all made it through. The reunion at her grandmother's house was everything Maya had hoped for and more. The family gathered, stories were told, lessons were shared. Maya's grandmother held court from her wheelchair, talking about Rosa Parks, about Fannie Lou Hamer, about all the women throughout history who'd refused to accept being treated as less than. "You're part of that legacy now, baby girl," her grandmother said to Maya. "You stood up when it mattered most. You spoke when people wanted you quiet. You saved your mama because you trusted yourself more than you trusted someone else's dismissal. That's what we do. That's what we've always done." Maya absorbed this, understanding in a way she hadn't before that courage wasn't about not being scared. Courage was being terrified and standing in the aisle anyway. Courage was pressing the call button even after being told no. Courage was believing your mother's life mattered even when someone else acted like it didn't. Back in Atlanta, life tried to return to normal, but nothing was quite the same. The story had sparked a national conversation about racial bias in medical settings, about how Black women's pain is routinely dismissed, about how children are often the ones who see truth most clearly. Sarah Chin wrote a comprehensive article about the experience that was published in several major outlets. She talked about systemic failures, individual choices, and the importance of believing people when they say something's wrong. The article went viral, reaching millions, changing perspectives, maybe even saving lives by making people more aware of their own biases. Tyler Rodriguez was not only not fired but promoted. He became part of the airline's new training program, teaching other flight attendants about medical emergencies, about trusting their instincts, about the courage to challenge authority when lives are at stake. He thought about Maya every time he taught a class, about how a 10-year-old child had shown more leadership than most adults he knew. Dr. Mitchell made major changes in his life. He reduced his patient load to spend more time with his daughter. He started a clinic providing free cardiac care to underserved communities, naming it the Thompson Clinic after Diane and Maya. He became an advocate for addressing racial disparities in cardiac care, speaking at conferences, publishing papers, using his platform to amplify voices that were too often ignored. Marcus Johnson, the business consultant who'd almost stayed silent, quit his job. He started a nonprofit focused on empowering Black professionals to speak up, to take risks, to trust their instincts even in environments that punished them for it. He thought about how he'd almost let his fear of consequences keep him quiet, and how a child had shown him what real courage looked like. And Karen Hendricks? She spent months after her termination in a deep depression, wrestling with who she'd become and how she'd gotten there. She started therapy, really honest therapy, digging into the resentments and biases she'd carried for years. She volunteered at a community health clinic, doing administrative work, trying in some small way to make amends for the harm she'd caused. She'd never work in aviation again. She'd lost her career, her reputation, her sense of self. But somewhere in the rubble of all that, she started to find something like honesty. She started to see people again instead of problems. She started to recognize her own humanity by recognizing others. It wasn't redemption. It was just the beginning of a very long road. 6 months after the emergency landing, Maya and Diane were invited to speak at a medical conference about patient advocacy and listening to marginalized voices. Maya, now 11, stood at a podium in front of hundreds of doctors and nurses and told her story. She talked about being scared, about being dismissed, about refusing to accept that her mother's life didn't matter. The lady on the plane said my mama was fine, Maya said, her voice clear and strong. But I knew she wasn't. And I had to choose, be polite like I was taught or be loud enough to save my mama. I chose my mama. I'll always choose my mama. And I think maybe that's what all of you need to remember with your patients. Sometimes the person saying something's wrong isn't being dramatic. Sometimes they're trying to save a life. Sometimes you gotta listen to the people who seem small. Sometimes the smallest voice is telling the biggest truth. The audience erupted in applause. Doctors came up afterward to tell Maya she'd changed how they'd practice medicine, how they'd listen to patients, how they'd trust mothers and children and people who've been dismissed too many times before. Diane watched her daughter with pride so fierce it was almost painful. This beautiful, brave child had saved her life twice. Once on that plane by refusing to be quiet, and once after by giving her a reason to fight through recovery. Diane had quit both her jobs, was living on disability while her heart healed, and had started studying to become a patient advocate. She wanted to help other people navigate the medical system that had failed her so many times. She wanted to make sure what happened to her didn't happen to others. As they left the conference, Sarah Chin was waiting for them. She'd flown in from Seattle where she'd taken a new job specifically working with Black families navigating healthcare crises. She'd become close to the Thompson family, a permanent fixture in their lives, an adopted aunt to Maya. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said to Maya, hugging her tight. "Your grandma would be proud too." Maya's grandmother had passed away peacefully 2 months earlier, surrounded by family, having lived long enough to see her granddaughter become a voice for change. Her last words to Maya had been simple. "You did good, baby. You did real good. Now keep doing it." Dr. Mitchell met them for dinner that night, bringing his daughter along. The two girls, Maya and Emily Mitchell, had become friends, bonding over their shared experience of almost losing a parent and realizing how precious time together really was. They talked about school and music and dreams, normal kid stuff, while the adults watched and marveled at resilience. "I never properly thanked you," Diane said to Dr. Mitchell. "You saved my life." "No," Dr. Mitchell said, looking at Maya. "She saved your life. I just did my job. But she did something much harder. She believed in you when no one else would. She fought for you when it would have been easier to stay quiet. She reminded me what medicine is supposed to be about. Seeing people, believing people, fighting for people who can't fight for themselves." The meal was long and warm and full of laughter, the kind of chosen family gathering that happens when strangers are bound together by shared trauma and shared triumph. They toasted to survival, to courage, to the power of refusing to be silent when silence means death. Later that night, as Diane tucked Maya into bed in their small Atlanta apartment, Maya asked the question she'd been thinking about for months. "Mama, why do you think that lady didn't help us?" Diane considered her answer carefully. "I think she forgot to see us as people. I think she looked at us and saw something that fit into boxes in her mind, and those boxes told her we weren't worth listening to. I think she'd been hurt and disappointed and tired for so long that she stopped caring. And I think somewhere along the way she decided some people mattered more than others." "That's sad," Maya said. "It is sad," Diane agreed. "But you know what's not sad? You refused to let her make us invisible. You stood up. You spoke up. You saved us both. And maybe, just maybe, you changed things for other people too. All those people watching the videos, reading the stories, hearing you speak. Maybe some of them will listen better now. Maybe some of them will believe Black women when they say they're in pain. Maybe some of them will trust their kids when their kids say something's wrong." "Do you think she's sorry?" Maya asked. "The flight attendant lady?" Diane thought about this. She'd received a letter, forwarded through the airline's legal department, from Karen Hendricks. It was full of apologies and explanations and regrets. Diane had read it once and put it away, not sure yet what to do with it. "I think she's sorry she got caught. I think she's sorry she lost her job. I don't know if she's sorry for the right reasons yet. But maybe one day she will be. Maybe one day she'll understand what she almost took from us." "I hope so," Maya said. "I hope she learns." That's the thing about children, Diane thought. They still believed in people's capacity to change, to grow, to become better. Maybe that was naive. Or maybe it was the truest kind of wisdom. As Maya drifted off to sleep, Diane sat by her window looking out at the Atlanta skyline. She thought about how close she'd come to never seeing this view again, never tucking her daughter in again, never getting to watch Maya grow into the remarkable woman she was clearly going to be. She thought about all the Black women who'd experienced similar dismissals but didn't have a daughter brave enough to fight, didn't have a doctor willing to help, didn't have strangers who became advocates. She thought about the ones who died because no one believed them, no one listened, no one thought their pain was real. The statistics were staggering. Black women were 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. They were routinely given less pain medication, received later diagnoses, experienced worse outcomes. Their symptoms were dismissed as exaggeration, their pain minimized as overreaction, their very bodies treated as less worthy of care and concern. Diane had almost become another statistic. But she didn't. And now she had a responsibility to make sure her survival meant something, helped someone, changed something. The next morning, Diane made a phone call she'd been thinking about for weeks. She contacted a civil rights attorney about not just her case, but about a broader lawsuit against the systemic failures that had almost killed her. She wasn't interested in money. She was interested in change. Real change. Policy change. Training change. The kind of change that meant the next black woman who said, "I can't breathe," would be believed the first time, not after she was nearly dead. The case would take years. It would be exhausting and re-traumatizing and difficult. But Diane Thompson had survived a heart attack and a system that didn't value her life. She could survive this too. And maybe, just maybe, she could make sure other women didn't have to. 1 year after the emergency landing, Maya's story was featured in a documentary about racial bias in healthcare. She was 12 now, taller, still brave, but with a weariness in her eyes that came from seeing how ugly the world could be. She'd received hate mail alongside the love letters. She'd been called a liar by people who refused to believe racism could be that blatant. She'd been told she was making things up, seeking attention, playing the victim. But she'd also received thousands of letters from people who said her story changed them, helped them, saved them. From black women who'd been dismissed by doctors and now knew to advocate harder. From children who'd learned they could speak up even when adults told them to be quiet. From medical professionals who'd examined their own biases and committed to doing better. In the documentary, Maya spoke directly to the camera, her voice steady and sure. "I was just a kid trying to save my mama. I didn't think about being brave or making history or changing anything. I just knew my mama was dying and nobody would help. So I stood up. And I guess what I learned is that sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes one person standing up is enough to make everybody else stop and pay attention. Sometimes being small doesn't mean being powerless." The documentary ended with footage of Maya and Diane at a medical conference, with Sarah Chen working with families, with Dr. Mitchell at his community clinic, with Tyler Rodriguez training new flight attendants. It showed the ripple effects of one moment of crisis, one child's courage, one community's response. It showed Karen Hendricks too, briefly working at a community health clinic, talking about her journey to understanding her own biases. The filmmakers asked if she'd learned anything. "I learned that everyone thinks they're not racist until they are," she said quietly. "I learned that bias doesn't announce itself. It just quietly makes you see some people as less real, less important, less worthy of believing. And I learned that by the time you realize what you've done, the damage is already catastrophic." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "If I could talk to Diane Thompson and her daughter, I'd say I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't undo almost killing someone, but I'm sorry anyway. And I'm trying to be better. That's all I can do now. Try to be better." Diane watched that documentary with Maya curled up beside her on the couch. When Karen's segment came on, Maya looked up at her mother. "Do you forgive her, Mama?" Diane thought about it. Really thought about it. "I don't know yet, baby. Forgiveness is complicated. She almost took you away from me. She almost took me away from you. That's hard to forgive. But I hope she really is trying to be better. I hope she really learned something. Because if she did, then maybe some good came from something terrible. Maybe her becoming better means other people won't have to go through what we did. That would be good," Maya said. "More people being better would be real good." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rest of the documentary, seeing their story told back to them from the outside. It was strange seeing yourself become a symbol, a story, a lesson. But if that's what it took to change things, Diane thought, then she'd accept it. The documentary ended with a title card listing statistics about racial disparities in healthcare, followed by resources for people who felt they weren't being heard by medical professionals. Then came the final message. Believe black women. Believe children. Believe people when they say something's wrong. Your bias could cost someone their life. Their courage could change the world. The screen faded to black and then came the dedication. For every black woman whose pain was dismissed. For every child who found the courage to speak up. For every person who refused to be silent when silence meant death. You matter. Your life matters. Don't let anyone tell you different. Maya read the words and felt something shift inside her. She was part of something bigger now, part of a legacy of speaking up and standing firm. She was connected to Rosa Parks and her grandmother and every woman who'd ever refused to accept being treated as less than. She looked at her mother, this strong, beautiful woman who'd survived against odds that should have killed her, and made a promise to herself. She'd keep speaking up. She'd keep standing firm. She'd keep fighting for people who needed fighting for. Not because she was special or different or particularly brave, but because someone had to. And if a 10-year-old girl on a plane could stop an entire flight to save her mother, then that same girl at 12, at 20, at 50, could keep stopping the world from moving forward until it listened, until it changed, until it got better. That's the thing about courage. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. It's just a little girl standing in an aisle saying, "No, I won't sit down." It's just a tired woman pressing a call button one more time even though she's been dismissed. It's just a stranger deciding to help instead of look away. It's just a doctor remembering why he went into medicine in the first place. It's just everyday people making the choice to see each other as human, to believe each other's pain, to fight for each other's survival. And sometimes, if we're lucky, that everyday courage compounds. It ripples out. It changes policies and practices and hearts and minds. It turns a moment of crisis into a movement for change. It transforms tragedy into testimony, suffering into strength, silence into story. Maya Thompson was 12 years old, and she'd already done more to change the world than most people do in a lifetime. But she was just getting started. Because she'd learned something on that plane, something in that hospital, something in the year that followed. She'd learned that her voice mattered. That speaking up was worth the risk. That standing firm in the face of dismissal could save lives. That being small didn't mean being powerless. That courage was contagious. That change was possible. And most importantly, she'd learned that she came from a long line of women who'd refused to accept injustice, who'd stood up when it was dangerous, who'd spoken out when it was easier to stay quiet, who'd fought for dignity and respect and the simple right to be believed. She was a Thompson woman. She was her grandmother's granddaughter. She was her mother's daughter. And she would carry that legacy forward, one act of courage at a time, one moment of truth at a time, one refusal to be silent at a time. Because 30,000 feet up in the air, a little black girl had stopped an entire flight. And in doing so, she'd started something that couldn't be stopped, shouldn't be stopped, wouldn't be stopped until every black woman's pain was believed, every child's voice was heard, and every person's life was valued equally. That's the story. That's the legacy. That's the truth. And it started with 3 words that changed everything: "My mama can't breathe." 3 words that refused to be ignored. 3 words that demanded to be heard. 3 words that saved a life and sparked a movement and reminded us all of something we should never have forgotten. Everyone deserves to be believed. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to breathe. If you've made it this far, if this story touched you, moved you, changed you even a little bit, then do something with that feeling. Believe the next person who tells you they're in pain. Listen to the next child who says something's wrong. Stand up the next time you see someone being dismissed or diminished or treated as less than. Be the person who stops the plane. Be the person who presses the call button. Be the person who believes. Be the person who sees. Be the person who fights. Because we're all on this flight together. And when one of us can't breathe, none of us should be able to sit comfortably in our seats and pretend everything's fine. Maya Thompson taught us that. A 10-year-old girl who loved her mama more than she feared authority, who valued life more than she valued politeness, who chose courage over compliance. If she can do it, so can we. So can you. Now the question is, will you?